This is my dad, Earl Root, and his father's name was Earl Root. During World War II, he married Alice Pleer, and together they ran a mom-and-pop grocery store from 1955 to 1965. It doesn't exist anymore, so here's my poor rendition. This is literally the story of the Roots and family roots. Warning, there will be dates ahead, but don't worry, you're not in 9th grade, and this isn't history class. England, 1500s. Except for their influences, gone were the Celts, Picts, Belgic tribes, the Gauls, Romans, Danes, and Vikings. The Anglo-Saxons had become known as the Anglos, and eventually the English. In the 1500s, the population of England was about 3 million. There were yearly breakouts of plague and sickness, so for a while that population stayed around that number. Due to a general shortage of laborers, wages and standard of living were relatively reasonable, if you call it reasonable living in a period of poor sanitation, polluted water, limited bathing, public latrines, and limited medical knowledge and practices. Starting around 1550 and over the next 200 years, things began to change, and the city of London started on its ascent to become the center of a worldwide empire. Around 1571, John Root, with or without an E on the end of his surname, was born in Milton Malzer in Northamptonshire, England. There are theories that the Root family came to England after escaping from religious persecution in France. However, these are currently just theories. It's a little-known fact that George Washington's third great-grandfather had lived in Northamptonshire and worked in the wool trade, which was a major part of Northamptonshire's economy. Getting back to John Root. John moved with his parents from Milton Malzer to a town named Fowlsley, and eventually to Badby, Northamptonshire, where at the age of 26 he married Anne Rochelle, and they had 4 children. 2 of those children, John Root Jr. and Thomas Root, would go across the Atlantic to the New World between 1620 and 1638, a period known as the Great Puritan Migration. John and Thomas would be the ancestral source for a great many of the American roots today. The Great Puritan Migration brought an estimated 20,000 people to what would be called New England, where 6 main colonies were formed. Thomas Root came over in 1637 and started what is called the Hartford line of roots. Thomas is recognized as the founder of Hartford. John Root Jr. may have also come over in 1637. We know that he married Mary Kilbourne in 1638 in Connecticut. John and Mary started what is known as the Farmington line of roots. Farmington is 10 miles west of Hartford. John Root Jr.'s future wife came aboard the ship the Increase in 1635. Mary Kilbourne was 16 and traveling with her parents and 4 siblings. For purposes of clarity and my sanity, we're going to look at John Root Jr. and the Farmington line, and we're also going to look at 1 child from each set of descendants. John Root had a son named Caleb. Caleb had a son also named Caleb. Caleb II had a son named Asahel Root, and he had a son named Nathaniel. Caleb is listed in many places as Dr. Caleb Root, but I find no evidence he was a doctor, and this may even be a transcription error from senior to doctor. However, his grandson Enoch was a doctor, so we just don't know. For the most part, the occupation of the Roots were founders, settlers. They farmed, they built, they coped with the weather, and attended church and community gatherings. Let's take a look at the spouses and number of children from each of our descending sons. John Root Jr. and Mary Kilbourne had 8 children. His son Caleb had 5 children by 2 women, with unknown Gillette and Elizabeth Salmon. Their son Caleb II, with Joanna Shaw, had 11 children. Asahel, with Mary Shaw, had 9 children, and Nathaniel, with Lois Barnes, had 8 children. Nathaniel Root was born in 1766 in Canaan, Connecticut, where his father Caleb Jr. had married Mary Shaw in 1755. This was 5 years after Caleb Jr.'s death in Farmington. Canaan, Connecticut is about 40 miles west of Farmington and close to the border with Massachusetts. It's a little-known fact that 3.7 miles from Canaan is a Root cemetery, which has 30 burials, 6 of which are Roots and 7 of which are Gillette. Where did we see the name Gillette before? Getting back to Nathaniel, who was the fifth of 9 children: Rhoda, Martha, Mary, Asa, Nathaniel, Elijah, Sarah, Cyrus, and Samuel Root. At the age of 68, Nathaniel Root applied for a war pension and stated that his brother-in-law, more likely his cousin, Samuel Root, had been serving in 1782 under Captain Adam Granger, and after he was stationed at Horseneck Landing, West Greenwich, Connecticut, he was struck lame with a fever. Nathaniel's dad arranged for his nephew Samuel to be taken to a hospital. He also arranged for his son, 15-year-old Nathaniel, to serve in substitution for Samuel. Nathaniel then served 7 months until Samuel returned to the army. In 1790, at the age of 24, Nathaniel married a woman named Lois Barnes in Canaan. They had 8 children, starting with Sheldon in 1791 and ending with Elizabeth Ann in 1819. All of the children were born in Connecticut except Elizabeth Ann, who was born in Utica, New York. Circa 1813, Nathaniel owned land in Floyd, New York, 12 miles from Utica. Over the next 31 years, the family had several moves, but stayed within the comfy confines of Onondaga County. Lois Barnes died in 1844, and Nathaniel died in 1846. Half of the children of Nathaniel and Lois stayed in New York, hovering around Onondaga County. The other half, the younger half, ventured westward, with the first one being the youngest, Elizabeth Ann Root, who married Charles Millard and moved to Iowa County in Wisconsin, circa 1847. Nathaniel Jr. married Chloe Luce in 1830 and moved to Jefferson County, Wisconsin in 1856. And then in 1858, he moved to Verona, Wisconsin in Dane County. Nathaniel and Chloe had 10 children between 1832 and 1859, with the second child named Henry, perhaps after his closest brother, Henry Root. Nathaniel Jr. was a preacher early on in Wisconsin, but moved on to farming and carpentry in Verona. During the Civil War, his crops were decimated by chinch bugs, and he had to go elsewhere for income. So Nathaniel Jr. enlisted and went to work for the Union Army at the age of 56. He died of typhoid and pneumonia near Little Rock in 1864. Because of the war, his body could not be moved, and he was buried in Arkansas with a headstone, and in Verona he has a monument. Phoebe Root married Daniel Damuth, and in 1850 she was living in Jefferson County. 3 of the 8 children married into the Damuth family: Polly, Sarah, and Josiah. The name Damuth has German origins and means humble. Henry Root was in between Nathaniel Jr. and Elizabeth Ann in terms of age and also in terms of going west to Wisconsin. Henry was born in 1807 in Litchfield, Connecticut. He married Mary Ann Whitney circa 1828 in New York, and their firstborn was Whitney in 1829. In 1850, 4 years after his father Nathaniel's death, Henry and Mary had 6 children and were living on a farm in Lysander in Onondaga County. Henry and Anna's children were Whitney, Elizabeth, Sarah, Mary, Andrew Jackson, and Julia Root. Mary Anna, or Mary Ann Whitney, married Henry Root in 1827. Whitney is an Old English surname that derives from the location of Whitney in Herefordshire, England. The Whitney family is a prominent American family descended from English immigrant John Whitney, who left London in 1635 and settled in Watertown, Massachusetts. By the mid-1840s, Wisconsin Territory had twice the population it needed to become a state. And in 1848, Wisconsin became the 30th state, with the largest contingent being people from New England who were called Yankees. Germans were the second largest group of immigrants, followed by the British. There's a lot of history to Jefferson County. A fort was built near Koshkoning Lake, and a town was named after the general of that fort, Henry Atkinson, who was a commander during the Black Hawk War of 1832. The town was named Fort Atkinson, with the Rock River running through the town and a few miles northeast of Lake Koshkoning. Shortly after 1850, Henry Root and Mary Whitney Root left the farm in Lysander and took 5 of their 6 children and joined the Yankee migration west, landing in Jefferson County in southern Wisconsin. Henry did not have much time to enjoy Wisconsin. He died in 1853, less than 3 years after arrival. Elizabeth Root was called Eliza, and she stayed in Lysander, New York, when the rest of the family went west to Wisconsin. Eliza married Truman Lemonnier, who had worked as a cartman, did teamwork, and as a boatman. Truman outlived Eliza, who died in 1894. Made the newspaper several times involving horses, road accidents, and getting fined for using a galled horse, a horse with open sores. Truman worked into his 70s, and a 1901 newspaper account said he had been rendered insensible after falling from his wagon during a runaway. Truman and Eliza had 3 children. Sarah Root married a man named, you guessed it, Damuth. She married Abram Damuth in 1854, and they had 3 children. She died at the age of 30 around 1864, probably due to childbirth or the cholera epidemic that was going around. Mary Root married James Marcellus Vosburgh in 1858, and they had 2 children. They worked a farm in Jefferson County, and Mary outlived her husband and one of her children. She died at the age of 90 in 1927. Andrew Jackson was 26 when he married Alice Thompson in 1870. They had 6 children. Andrew was a cooper by trade, a person who crafted and repaired wooden barrels and other containers. The family moved several times and settled near Green Bay, Wisconsin. In April of 1904, a fire broke out at the candy factory where Andrew worked, and Andrew was overcome by smoke after re-entering the building. He died at the age of 60. Julia Root was the youngest child of Henry and Mary Whitney Root. She arrived in Wisconsin around the age of 5, and her father Henry died when she was 7. She married David Douglas in 1866 and left that same year for LaGrange, Monroe County in western Wisconsin. LaGrange is French for the farm, and David and Julia worked their 45-acre farm for over 30 years. David and Julia had 4 daughters, Lily, Ida, Mabel, and Pearl. Devout members of the Methodist Church, David died in 1903 and Julia died in 1907. It's a little-known fact that part of LaGrange was known as Hopville in the 1860s and 1870s for its numerous hops crops. While it never became an official village, there was a Hopville school, and the community continued to have a news column in the Toma newspaper until the 1930s. What about Henry and Mary's firstborn, Whitney? I guess you're just going to have to wait. Tweet, 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 tweet.